Was Nelson Mandela a terrorist or a freedom fighter?
The reason why I bring this up today is to discuss a little bit more this notion of freedom fighters versus terrorists. It's a question that doesn't seem to want to go away. As I've mentioned, I think on several occasions in the past, one of the more recent definitions or ways of looking at freedom fighters was provided by Ronald Reagan, U.S. president in the 1980s. And he was talking about the Contras, which were a group of Nicaraguans who fled Nicaragua after the overthrow of the Somoza regime in 1979 and the installation of the Sandinista government, which had some support from Cuba and was seen as a Marxist movement. And Ronald Reagan came up with his famous line, "One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist." Where does this leave us? I would argue it leaves us nowhere good. We know that there is no single definition of terrorism. There are hundreds of definitions of terrorist. Again, to go back to the example in Canada in the 1860s, there are those, obviously, who felt that British policy in Ireland was unfair, that the Irish people were being badly mistreated. The potato famine is seen in many ways as a result of British economic policies at the time. And there's no question that many people saw the Irish as a nation that should be independent from Britain, shouldn't have to serve under the British yoke, have its economy tied to the British economy, have the Brits get the best land, etc., etc. So from that perspective, anybody seeking to gain Irish freedom would be a freedom fighter, right? Well, I suppose. And yet on the other side of the coin, if you're in Canada at the time, and this ragtag bunch of Civil War veterans come screaming over the border, trying to kill you and burn your farmland and take possession of territory to act as a bargaining chip for negotiations with England over the status of Ireland, they sure as shit aren't going to be seen as freedom fighters, are they? They're going to be seen as terrorists.
What is terrorism? Well, simply speaking, a terrorist act can be any political activity that's intended to intimidate a population or coerce a government to take some form of action.
I'm less interested in what the definition of a terrorist act is and more interested in pointing out that who is a terrorist and who is a freedom fighter, who is a threat and who is a liberator, is all based on the lens in which you look at it. History is written by the winner, and even if the winner had committed terrorist acts, they're not going to admittedly state that they're a terrorist organization, even though they are committing acts of terror in order to accomplish their goals and invading another country or taking control of it. And the people that live there obviously believe that they're standing up for their country and that they are liberators or they're freedom fighters because they're protecting their country. Now, the same premise applies to other things as well.
Nelson Mandela a terrorist or a freedom fighter? What about the rebels that overthrew the Gaddafi regime in Libya, or other groups engaged in uprisings during the Arab Spring? What about the Free Syrian Army and other groups involved in armed conflict against the Assad regime in Syria? And what if these actions are only directed against the state's military forces?
So is prayer the same as spells?
What if you as an individual had the ability to pray or to meditate and manifest changes in reality?
I feel like that spells and prayer require your focus, your intention, and your will. And why do I feel that way? Well, if we look back at what I said a prayer was, you are creating, you are deliberately, willfully connecting and having and building a rapport with deity. If you don't have the focus, if you don't have the intention, then you can sit there and recite the Lord's Prayer and be thinking about the grocery list. My feeling is that's not a prayer. You're just sitting there reading words, but there's no intention and no meaning behind what you're saying. So you're not building a rapport. You're just reading something. You're not comprehending what you're saying, and you're not meaning what you say. So prayer and spells require your will and your focus and your intent. Just like you can open a book. Here we go. I have the craft here. I can open a book and, here's a spell and read the spell. But if I have no intention in that spell, if there's no will and focus, then that spell isn't going to manifest. It's meaningless. So prayer and spell work are very similar in those two. Both open channels for energy.
A prayer is exactly the same as casting a spell. You're calling on a higher power in order to make changes in your environment because whatever is happening at the moment is not good for you. And so you're asking for relief. So regardless of whether you call it casting a spell or praying to the divine energy or tapping into the unified field, is exactly the same thing. And so if you are an authority, whether you're government or you're running a business and you're doing it through unfair means and you're trying to extort your customers, and it negatively impacts you, then that is going to change your view on magic. It's actually working against you. White magic is the only magic there is. Your perception, what it is if it negatively impacts you because you're doing evil things, if you're doing bad things, you might call it black magic. You definitely would probably call it demonic.
Well, the fact is that there's only white magic, and the only way that magic will manifest itself or any changes or any prayer will be answered is if the cause is just and that it's selfless. If it's selfish, it doesn't work.
Where for the person that it's impacting, of course they're going to say that it's evil. They can't admit that they're doing wrong in what they're doing.
I feel like you can do spell work using just your personal energy. Now at this point I'm going to say that you could argue that my personal energy is connected to deity, and therefore even using my personal energy is going to be using the energy of deity. I may agree with you personally, but I know individuals who do not believe that. And it's my belief that those individuals who do not believe in a greater power can still successfully cast spells.
Well, this is true, and it's available to everybody. All of the religious doctrines have had all of the keys taken and removed from the biblical text that tell you how to pray. They've been hidden away. If you're Jewish, in the Jewish mystic books, the Sephers, or if you're Christian, the Book of Thomas tells you the correct way to pray to be able to manifest changes in the unified field.
That you can connect with the energies around you, connecting with your environment, connecting with the earth, and not view the earth as deity, or connecting with my own power and not seeking power outside of myself to connect and still perform a successful spell.
Now, she's saying spell because she's a Wiccan. I'm not a witch. I pray to God, and I can manifest the same types of changes that she can.
Everywhere there is a magical value in the unknown. There is something that, if you can visualize it as useful or helpful, can do wonderful things. This is the secret of holy relics. No one knows how efficacious they really are, but that they have resulted in miraculous circumstances cannot be denied. We do not know just how the healings of Lourdes and Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré are achieved, but certainly the belief is important. The charm, their symbolism, the prayer, and a physical action to make all these things into one pattern gives the individual a strength that he does not otherwise possess. Now, white magic in its essential form must be virtuous. White magic is that which serves without hurting. It is that which accomplishes good and is never used for any other purpose. White magic is the use of the powers of life, the powers of nature, and even the ordinary faculties of the mind for the perpetuation of constructive imagery. It is necessary, therefore, that all white magic, in order to retain its nature, must be backed by a strong moral character. This is something that has been very common throughout Asia, where most of the dedicated mendicants, the holy men, have achieved a kind of white magic by gaining complete control over their own minds, their own emotions, or their own actions. These people, to remain white magicians, would under no conditions pervert, corrupt, or compromise the principles which they hold sacred. Therefore, a life dedicated to certain spiritual principles gains also a strength. And this strength can be considered as magical, because it involves faculties that cannot be completely classified. No one can be sure what happens, but if something does happen, then in some mysterious way, an energy that resides in nature is made available to the human being. Many years ago, in several countries, there was a form of mentalism developed in which individuals took lessons in how to influence other people's thinking. All you had to do was sit very quietly, meditate, say certain holy names, and turn the attention to this distant person whom you wish to influence, and force them to make the changes that you can cause them to make by the use of magic. That went on quite a while. The exponent did pretty well for themselves. And, of course, the teachers did very well for themselves, as they always do under those conditions. And then came the deluge. Suddenly, these people who were out influencing others realized that others could be influencing them at the same time. And that was all different. We wished to influence other people to do what we want, but we didn't want them to influence us to do what they want. And so that whole group of nervous breakdowns resulted, in which individuals were frightened to death that others were using on them what they had been trying to use on each other. So this gradually faded out. It wasn't so good anymore. It became obvious that all over-influence can work both ways. And when it starts to work in reverse, it loses its interest, but becomes a source of greater fear and anxiety. Black magic is represented in a heavy literature called grimoires. These are little penny productions, most of them forgeries, accredited to great teachers of the past. One is the grimoire of St. Augustine, another is the grimoire of St. Thomas Aquinas, then there is a grimoire of Aristotle. All different names of famous people have been put on books made up of funny magical characters that don't spell anything and in languages nobody can read, but were supposed to carry charms for the control of spirits. And in the black magic societies, it was assumed that there was an infernal equivalent to the divine hierarchy. As there was a god, though there was a devil. As this god was served by all kinds of angels and archangels and thrones and dominations and powers, so the infernal god was served by all forms of evil beings. And one such evil being, of course, is the hero in Faust's story about Mephistopheles. But anyway, these evil spirits became a hierarchy, and lessons were given in it, and in doing these things, and many famous people are believed to have signed pacts with fallen angels to have all the powers of the world for a certain length of time, and then lose their own souls. One who signed such a pact, according to pretty solid tradition at least, was Oliver Cromwell. And the pact ended on a certain day, and so did he.